Hi, and welcome to Knife Chats. Today we're going to be talking about the lobster knife, a traditional pattern folding knife.
Hello, today I'm going to be talking about the lobster knife. This is an interesting pattern of knife. It's a type of gentleman's knife or also a manicure knife or a personal grooming knife. And in every case, the knife will be laid out in this fashion. On one end, you will have a pair of scissors and a file, and those will be on opposite sides of the handle. And on the reverse end, you will have a single pen blade. Now the handle might change a little bit. They're typically under 3 inches long, but they will always have these three blades: a file, scissors, and a pen blade. And then it'll be on an equal end handle. By equal end, it means that both ends of the handle are the same width. It may or may not have a bail. This one has a bail. Another one over here I have does not have a bail, but you do see that once again on one end it has a file and a pair of scissors and then a pen blade. This one's a little more ornate. I'll have specifications on both of these knives at the end of the video in a slideshow. So that's really the way a lobster knife will almost always look. Now obviously other knives will have these three blades and will be called a lobster knife, but technically they're not a true lobster knife. Also other knives will have additional blades added to it, so it's kind of a play on the lobster knife, but it's not a true lobster knife, or it's not the traditional lobster knife. For instance, here we have the fly fishing knife. This one is by Marbles, and we see on one end we have a file and a pair of scissors. It also has this little pen blade here, but if we get actually that's exactly what it is. It's a pick. We'll close that up, but if we open it up, it looks just like a lobster knife, with the exception that it has a little clip blade on this end, but it's much larger, significantly larger. So it looks like a lobster knife, but it's too big to be your typical traditional lobster knife, and it's really designed for fly fishers, and it has the additional blade added to it. But you can see that its roots were definitely within the lobster family. And here we have another knife. In this case, you have a clip blade and scissors down here, and on the other end you have the file and an extra pen blade. And if you notice, they all open on the same size like any traditional pocket knife would. So while it has all the blades of a lobster knife, the blades are not laid out correctly. So it's really not a lobster knife, but it is a manicure knife or a personal grooming knife. So we'll close that one up. I'll also have specs on that one at the end. And then we have just your basic equal end pen knife, but in this case it has a file on one end and a spear blade on the other. So not the same blades, but it definitely could be used for personal grooming. Size wise, it is approximately the same size, a little bit bigger, but close enough that it would be considered a gentleman's knife or an equal end. Well, it is an equal end pen knife, but it's not like the lobster knife. Now there are knives that have exactly the same blades, but they're not laid out in the same fashion. For instance, we have this knife by Zippo, and we see on one end it has a file and a pen blade. On the opposite end it has the scissors. So has all the same blades as a lobster knife, but they're not laid out in the same fashion. And this pattern is actually quite popular, and it basically has replaced the older lobster knives that you usually see or used to see. And if anyone is familiar with this, they know exactly what knife this is copied off of, and that is the Victorinox Swiss Army Classic. And we see here a classic with lobster scales and all the blades of a lobster knife. So is it a lobster knife? If nothing else, I would say it's close enough, and most people usually throw it in as a lobster knife. For me, it's not a true lobster knife, but it is close enough to be considered in the family of lobster knives. You can see the difference here, the way the blades are laid out versus the Victorinox Classic SD here. However, that's the Victorinox Classic SD, not quite a lobster knife, even though it has a lobster on the scale. But we do have this knife by Victorinox, and we see here on one end you have the file and the scissors, and on the other end you have the pin blade. And it is definitely an equal end knife. In fact, it's almost the exact same size as this one. So the only difference is this one has a tweezer and toothpick, but it's definitely a lobster knife, even though Victorinox refers to it as the Ambassador. So yes, Victorinox does make a lobster knife. It's their Ambassador, but the Classic SD is, if anything, an also ran and pretty darn close to being a lobster knife. And most people today do call it a lobster knife, even though it is not laid out in the traditional fashion. So, hope that helps a little bit with the traditional pattern of the lobster knife. And like I said, I will talk about all of the knives in a slideshow at the end, giving you basically the specifications of each knife. Thanks for watching.
Okay, on with the slideshow. I am just going to show the knives, and you can take a look at them and pause if you want to take a closer look at any of the knives. So the first one was the lobster knife that was shown mostly in the video. It was made in Solingen, Germany. The second lobster knife, the one that started off with the cracked eye scales, that one was made in Italy. It's about 2.5 inches long. The Lovebirds knife was just a manicure knife. This is the 4-bladed one. It's an unbranded knife, so I have no idea who made it. I suspect that it was made in Germany, and the handles were really nice on it. It's cast nickel silver, as best I can tell, and the blades were definitely carbon steel. The Arnux is a German company. This one happened to be made in Taiwan. I love collecting equal end pin knives, and this one I grabbed simply because of the file on it instead of a secondary pin blade. And I thought I would show it here just to give you a view of what an equal end pin knife would normally look like compared to a lobster knife. And then the marbles fly fisher is because it really does look like an oversized lobster knife, and well, it's a fishing knife, so lobsters and fishing kind of just go together. And then the Zippo elephant knife is one that I just recently got, and I got it simply because it is kind of like the modern version of the lobster knives. And obviously, when you get a classic SD with a lobster on the scale, it's hard not to think of it as a lobster knife. But when I was looking at that, I was thinking, does Victorinox actually make a lobster knife? So I started looking around, and sure enough, my Ambassador was just laying there and screaming, "Look at me, I'm a lobster knife." And sure enough, it truly is. So I hope you enjoyed all of that, and I will talk to you again soon. As always, thanks for dropping by, and remember, you're only as sharp as your knife.